Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions on a Monday afternoon. I'm in for Izabela Hamilton today. She's on a flight, but of course she'll be back next week. I haven't done any mindset stuff since peak COVID when we're doing the Mindset Sundays and Mondays before Isabella came on. So I want to speak today about boundaries. Important thing in life, in friendships, with your children and stuff like that. I've alluded to some of this stuff before, but I've been thinking about this stuff maybe 6 months now. And I think it's really important because some people don't aware or their boundaries are porous and they don't know the framework for boundaries. And I think it's really important in everything you do in day in life because it gives you peace of mind. You don't get involved in dramas and stuff like that if you understand the tool sets that are available. So I'll also talk about how to design a philosophy, what matters to you, and about who you are as a person and stuff like that. And the things that you either are or you want to get to or you want to maintain. So let's start quickly with definition of a boundary. A boundary is an imaginary line that separates you from someone else. It separates your physical space, your feelings, needs, and responsibility from others. Your boundaries also tell people how they can treat you, what is acceptable and what isn't. Now, without boundaries, people may take advantage of you because you haven't set the limits on how to expect to be treated. Now, this needs to titrate up and down. You overset your boundaries, you underset them. It's a lifelong thing that you would do over a period of time. But what happens is like a learning muscle that you carry on doing, you carry on doing, and carry on doing. So there's 5 key areas. You've got physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, sexual boundaries, which don't need to get into. People are pretty much clear there, but maybe some are not. Intellectual boundaries and financial boundaries. So when we look at physical boundaries, so that is the space that you occupy and that someone else is occupying too. Now, some people might get really keen and come up to you close and talk to you and stuff like that. And I think it can be kind of intimidating, especially for women, that if they're of a smaller size and you've got like a big towering person talking to them, it's like the shadow comes over, if you like. And that can be intimidating. So it's always being self-aware. It's like when you walk down the street late at night and the lady's in front of you, cross the road. It's thinking about stuff like that. But there's also the line of your boundaries and people stepping into your space and how you titrate up and down and adjust to those boundaries. So let me give you a couple of examples. Say a physical boundary. I was out the other night with some of the ladies, I won't name names, and there was a guy who's very drunk. And he come bowling along, and what he was joking, but he was so pissed that it wasn't funny because he couldn't hit his punchlines. And the 2 ladies I was with, one of them, stepped back, and then he started going, what's the world coming to, and everything else. And like in that moment, stuff like that can just get escalated and can go off. So I knew I needed to calm down the situation. It's 1 o'clock in the morning outside of a bar. As I said, he's pissed. So all I did was brought her in close to me, and I said calmly, "You've had a good night. Why don't you go and get your cab?" And on his way he went. In fact, to see him the next day, because he came back into the bar and he'd forgot his jacket. And I went, "All right, you're feeling a bit better after last night." So effectively, he knew what was going on, and he's a bit embarrassed with himself. But there's stuff like that where it's unacceptable, right? But then it's how you react as well. You've got to remember in life is it's 10% what happens and 90% how you react. Now, there are things where, for instance, with me, I'll show you love and I'll show you respect. But if you step into my space and you grab me, it's on. And I won't think anything less about it because it's self-preservation, right? You're protecting yourself. Now, the way I see it, if someone came to me, they're screaming in my face I'll calm them down, give them a kiss and a cuddle, and buy them a beer. But when someone grabs you, there's lines. And this is what I'm talking about, understanding and knowing where boundaries lie. And this is for men and women. Like, you could be in a situation where, let's look at, say, men. Men hate arguing with women. They're biologically programmed. Go and look at things like evolutionary biology and psychology. You've got all these data points going back years and years. So men do not like to argue with women whatsoever, because they're biologically programmed to love them, take care of them, protect them. And so that makes it very difficult. And you see it in relationships, and it's working out, what do you do, right? Because you've got somebody in front of you who's clearly upset. And when a man will argue with logic and the lady's in emotions, then it's not going to work. Because look, if you break it down, if you argue and win, you look bad. If you argue and lose, you look bad. If you don't argue and walk away, that's controlling. So the only thing that you can do is call a timeout. We all have our differences with our partners, and it heats up and stuff. But again, it's down to those kind of boundaries when you can turn around and say, okay, this is escalating. Let's take a step away from the table. And once everyone is calmed down, we'll come back and then we have a conversation. And it's like the conflict resolution that takes place there. But not everyone knows how to handle that, because they might not know about, evolutionary biology and psychology and not studied it and stuff. But there's some really key things that I think is really important on what we have in life, in terms of, we've got this social construct, and then you've got millions of years of biology. And so someone could write a piece that goes viral, and then suddenly that becomes true, when it's not. It's an opinion piece. There's no biology or anything to back it up. So then that can affect things in terms of a social construct versus years of biology. So that's one great way. And I mean, I know I'm talking about physical boundaries, but I'll get on to the other boundaries at the moment. But that was just an onlay onto that conversation to describe, like, if someone's in your physical space. It's the same with, like, when two men argue and it escalates and it's on a biological level, men get ready to go, right? There's this underlying respect when two gentlemen argue with each other. Obviously, you need to manage your triggers and all those kinds of things. And so you have to be very careful with that stuff, because who wants to have a criminal record and all that kind of stuff? It's nonsense. In the grand scheme of things, we're on this planet for only so long. And the idea is to get through, try and make a difference in your life. So when they get to your funeral one day, because it happens to us all, they're going to talk about your character. And that's the only thing that you're going to leave this world with, is that final conversation on your character. So let's get into emotional boundaries. So again, set precedent there of emotional boundaries. You look at how you make people feel, especially I find with women. It's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it can be quite damaging. And being, like, for me, because I'm just a straight shooter, if I say something and I'm just frank, I have to remember myself. The way that I say stuff is very, very important. And that's something I've learned to develop, because you live through your own life's perception. So when you say, like, no to someone, there's a difference between saying no and going, really not feeling that. Do you know what I mean? There's a complete different aspect to it. And it's like, when you're in that form of communication, you've got to remember is people remember how you made them feel. And so you have to kind of be as self-aware as possible for that. On the other side is emotional boundaries. Is relationships, avoiding the whole, people, will think it's good to do push and pull, or they'll say things that kind of bring their partner down. And even if it's joking, it can kind of really start to edge away at someone. So there's that element of emotional boundaries. It could be in work, it could be in business, it could be someone giving you a backhanded compliment, and or false praise or something, and you kind of know what it is, but because it's so covert, you'd kind of just leave it alone. But that is still your emotional space in the boundary. Now, if you run around calling everyone out and then go, no, I didn't mean that, the point I'm trying to get to is, as part of the whole structure of boundaries, you have to manage your own trigger as well. We all have triggers for different things. So for me, like, I personally, a lot of stuff, it just goes over my head. You don't see me all in the groups commenting and all that kind of stuff. I don't get involved in other people's business unless I'm asked to step in and do something. So for me, it's like one of my triggers, and it goes back to my childhood. I go into war mode if someone puts hands on a woman. And that goes back to my childhood, because one of my earliest memories was picking up the phone and dialing 999 when it was going off between my mum and stepdad. And obviously, because back then I was too small to protect or anything. So we all had these different triggers. And what happens is, when you want to look at stuff and you want to look at your life and you want to look at making improvements and thinking, why is that wrong? And what's going on here? Look to your childhood, because 99% of your answers will come from childhood. So emotional boundaries can be a series of things. It's what people say to you, it's how they say it to you. Again, you're never going to be perfect. You might say things as a bit of fun, or you might be like doing some banter, and the banter goes just a bit too far. Now, what you got to be careful of is being a snowflake, and it's managing that between, because these are just invisible lines, right? And this is something that you learn over time, and often, like, when someone triggers you and it goes off, right, that's something that you should look at yourself and go, okay, let me sit down, get a piece of paper. What makes me get triggered in that way? Why do I react that way? And that's how I've gone back to the whole thing, like, you put hands on a woman and I go to war. And that comes from my childhood. I know what that trigger is. I do try and manage that trigger, and fortunately, nothing's really happened there. And there's a few times things are ready to go, but they are triggers that I need to manage. And that's just me being open and honest. So I would say to you, have a think about what triggers you. Do you get on Facebook? Do you look at stuff? Does it trigger you? Do you get envious of stuff? Do you get jealous and stuff? Then ask why. Because then what happens is you're looking for some of the answers that are already there. And the thing is with triggers as well, he or she that triggers your emotions becomes your master. Because what happens, right? Let's just say you get into a debate on Facebook. You got the ump all day. You're refreshing the page. You go back in, and what should you be doing? You should be doing your business. You should be just getting on with your life. Things like being surrounded by stuff constantly trigger the news, politics, gossip, all that kind of stuff. All that does is becomes a compounded effect, right? And it doesn't make you happy. It makes you miserable. But the dopamine hits from that can obviously get through the day and stuff. And it's trying to, like, if you focus on you internally, and I'm not talking about being solipsistic, which we'll get into later, but if you focus on you and don't worry about other people. Now, you need feedback from other people. I have people that put me back in my box. I've got a few people, because I don't have yes men or women around me. I've got key people that pull me to the side and put me back in my box, and I pay attention to it. But that doesn't mean the troll on the internet gets that access to me to have that conversation. It's about people that you respect, and they've been around a bit and they know about that stuff. So it's important to have people around you, because that is one thing that keeps at bay things like entitlement. If you've got people that go through life running around like a wrecking ball, but no one checks them, they don't have people to check them. And what they do is they explode, they go off, and then they play the victim and everything else. what then happens is that person cannot improve because they didn't have the feedback or get the feedback that they want because people were not willing to give them the feedback itself. So sexual boundaries don't need to go into, we know that, you know, gentlemen, don't send dick pics and stuff. Women, don't put your hands all over someone else's man. You know, I'm not saying you would, but it's obvious, right? We know where the line is with stuff like that. Intellectual boundaries goes back to those battles on Facebook. There is nothing wrong with having a close friend that you vehemently, in a nice way, disagree with what they just said. It doesn't matter. But what happens is people get triggered. Like, you got to remember, it's like, it doesn't matter who they vote for. I mean, we're not talking about bad things here. It's just different points of view. We all live through a lens of our own, right? So what we see is our perception. And sometimes people get confused with the truth with their own perception. It's the same with feelings. Some people articulate feelings as facts, whereas facts are facts and feelings are feelings. Sometimes you feel a certain way and it's the truth and it's a fact, but people get caught up in that through the way that they feel. And so that is something that you can look at as well. And you see it quite a lot, is that people get into debates and they comment and then they get triggered and upset. So someone might write a comment and being snarky or think they're being funny. And when someone comes back, gives them a bit of banter, they don't like it. And then they get all pissy and get all upset and charged up, and because the ego thing, they don't want to be embarrassed in public. No one really wants to be publicly embarrassed. Let's be honest, right? And so, but what you got to look at is, if you do that, there is going to be repercussions and consequences of that kind of behavior. Now, you can't control what people say about you. You can't control what people think about you, but you can control your own behavior, right? That's something, that's your locus of control. That's your agency. You can control who you are. And the reality is that 90% of the people on this planet are good people. They just want to get on, and they have their own way of doing it. And no one's perfect. And I think people live to an expectation of perfection. And people sometimes are scared to apologize because they don't want to save face and their pride and everything else. It's hard. And not everyone can get it right each and every time. So there's the intellectual boundaries. Another thing is looking down on your peers who are far more educated than you. I've had that plenty of time. I've left school, I could barely read and write, got no qualifications and stuff. And when you go into well-to-do environments, you know, sometimes I'm seen as the little bit of rough, you know. Oh yeah, there's the East End boy, you know, and they have a bit of banter and stuff. But I that just rolls off my back. And it doesn't bother me. But just giving you a couple of examples is that, be aware is that kind of intellectual level as well is being that snootiness and stuff like that. Again, if you get that, don't get triggered. Be proud of your environment that you came from, because it's the character of the person that's made you today. If you're a good person or try to be a good person every day, it really doesn't matter. Financial boundaries. You know, you might be in a situation, let's just say shared family accounts, and you can't, one member keeps going overdrawn, and you ask them, can you not keep sending us into overdraft? We have to live within inside of our means. There's a good example there. And that's a boundary violation, because you've got a covenant of two people or more putting money into an account on that level of respect as well. It goes the same for in financial boundaries in business with expenses and stuff like that. So these are 5 of the key boundaries to look at. Next thing is like, well, setting boundaries. Now, setting boundaries, what tends to happen when you set boundaries, because let's call them hard and soft boundaries, and you titrate for the different people who you set boundaries with. So I'll give you an example. My daughter was bullied at school. I taught her a lot about boundaries and stuff. She'd been around some therapy. I went to war with the school because they wouldn't take accountability. Police was involved, and in the end, I was just relentless, and I wouldn't give up. And we went round, I think, 30 emails, stroke letters, legal guy involved, all that kind of stuff. And then we finally got them back to the table. And then she went back into school, but it wouldn't have stopped there. And like for me, it was for all of those single mothers who had to deal with that kind of thing with the school, but just didn't have the resources to push back. Because what the school was trying to do is manage kids out for optics to down the road. I'm like, no, I'm not having that. You're not sending my daughter to the shit school because you won't take accountability. Even the police, they were really annoyed with the school. And I remember when I sat down and when I was having a conversation with the school, and we were on a Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever, I said to them, one of the first things I said, listen, here's the problem that you got. When you get to the end of your long, illustrious career as a teacher, and you're sitting down in your chair and you look back on your career, what you don't want to do is that memory where you stood out in front of the audience and said, we've lost another one of our kids, knowing that you use red tape to get around it, because that's something that has to live and burn into your soul. And effectively, this is my only surviving child of 3, and it's not going to happen. We managed to get it resolved. Good relationship now with the school, but it took a lot. But getting back to the situation with my daughter Maya, the thing with that was she had to learn about boundaries and setting them, so she would overset the boundaries. And so she'd be too fierce with setting those boundaries. And she was still impeding on other boundaries because she was so forthright with it. And so it took a while to get her into a measured space, relieve the symptoms of CPTSD, that kind of hypervigilance and that kind of stuff. And it took a while to get into a good space. But as a 15-year-old child, she's going to grow into an incredible woman. And she's been through so much. But she did struggle with setting these boundaries. They were too hard. She was getting closed in. And it is like a constant run of how to set these boundaries. And I call them hard and soft boundaries. The example I gave you earlier on was if someone puts hands on me, that's a hard boundary. The soft boundary is if the guy, I asked him to walk away and told him to go and get a cab in a polite manner. So there are 2 examples there, but your boundaries might be different as well. It might be a boundary at work. It might be a boundary when you're in a club. It might be a boundary going into a workshop somewhere. It might just be a boundary at home. It's setting the boundaries with yourself and your children. Like there are certain conversations that your children shouldn't be privy to. And what can happen is there are times where I suppose where people overshare, and if you get to that stage of being too close and there isn't a boundary there for the level of respect, if you know what I mean. So when someone knows everything and you say yes to everything, then it's a free-for-all. But there are times when you have to kind of set the boundaries. And I've even said to Maya in the past, because I don't believe you put hands on women or children ever. So the only thing you do set is those boundaries. And when Maya goes off on one and stuff like that, I've said to her before, you don't have to like my decision, but you will respect it. And that was enough from the relationship that we have and the support that I give her through life. But I know that some people were difficult. I was a nightmare as a kid. 1-parent family, mum married 6 times. And that's no disrespect to her. But I've seen it all in that sense. And I was off the rails, getting arrested and all those kind of things. So what I got as a child is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And she's a real dream. And that's the thing, when you get into the setting of these boundaries and adjusting boundaries, you need to work out if your boundaries are porous or have been porous, it's like, how do you work and put this into play in the sense is like, okay, that's my boundary there. For that person, that boundary is there, because you can't set the same boundaries for the same people. Now, we'll come back and say is that you have to respect other people's boundaries. Now, another thing, you don't owe anyone anything. So if someone asks you to do something and you say N-O, no, you put a full stop at the end. What is that? That is a complete sentence. Now, some people, this is a good test for people on the cluster B spectrum. If you say, and you're polite, someone wants you and they're pushing, and you say no, and they explode, or they sulk like a petulant child, they're very much on the spectrum, somewhere on the spectrum of narcissism, whether that's histrionics, borderline personality disorder, NDP, and psychopathy. And it doesn't mean that they are, because it's a spectrum. It might be just one of the traits or comorbid traits of that. But that's really a good test with someone when, you say no. They push, and you affirm and you say no, and they explode. There's the red flag. Or they sulk like a petulant child and give you the silent treatment and stuff like that. Now, I'm going to be clear. That's just a trait on the spectrum. Borderlines and narcissists, there's 9 key traits. And I think you've got to have at least 5, and it has to be done in a medical setting with proof. You can't go around calling everyone that and they need to be diagnosed. I mean, some people have got greater traits than others, but that gives you a good indication about that level of respect towards boundaries as well. Now, with that in mind, it's then you're looking at setting all of these different boundaries. But one of the things is kind of map out the people around you. So you can take a bit of paper and you draw circles on the paper. So you're in a circle. So in your inner circle, it may, if you're a lucky person, you might have 2 or 3 people that they're your ride and dies. Yeah, they're the ones you take a bullet for, that appear in your circle, right? And then you've got a slightly larger circle where they're your friends and everything else, but they're not necessarily the ones that you call at any given time. When they're there, they need you, whatever they're doing, they'll drop it. And if you've got 3 or 4 of those friends, you're blessed for life. But I think what happens is people can get confused with that because they get upset with people's behavior and where they see themselves as their friend, and then their friend lets them down, and it kind of really hits them hard. And the thing is that you work it out. So you're in a circle, right? Depends on that. It could be friends, family, partner, in the circle. Slightly larger circle, close friends wouldn't go for war for you, but they're good friends and they're solid, etc. And then out of that, you've got business colleagues, your peers, that kind of things, your neighbours and stuff. And it's a good exercise to work out where does everyone sit in that map, because you've got your trust levels. And the key thing about trust is that if you study people long enough and you've been around them long enough, don't listen to the words, let them show you who they are. And when they show you, believe them. So what you've got to look at is the actions. People are going to talk, and they can be very good talkers, but nothing kind of comes through. It's kind of right, okay, you said this and you didn't do that. So what you've got to look at is that's how you structure. Because one of the toughest things that you'll come back from is not betrayal. There's 2 things, right? So you've got betrayal and malevolence. Now, the difference between betrayal and malevolence, someone could let you down and you feel betrayed, but they didn't mean it and they was very apologetic. But whereas malevolence is when someone does target you with intent and does it all intentional. They maybe have isolated you to look you and come with you, with you, and the goal behind it is malevolence. And so that is why you need to make sure is that when you've got people in your circles, and your circles will update through your life, because what happens is people move on and stuff happens, as you get older. Some people, you lose some of your friends along the way. I know that some of the kids on the council estate with me, some are dead now, in prison and stuff like that. And but it changes, right? And so what happens is as you go through life and you move in different circles, right? So your mindset updates as well, but not everyone's on the same level as mindset. There's nothing wrong with that, of those people around you. But it's really important you always looking to level up and surround yourself with the right people. And so that's one way to kind of to map those kind of things out. It's a small exercise. Just grab a piece of paper, because as it goes back to what I said, it's like betrayal. Someone could have done something, they feel betrayed, they've apologized, you found it hard to forgive them. That's a different story. But malevolence, you have to hit back hard. You do not tolerate malevolence, because what you've got to think is, with malevolence, if people come for you, for instance, in a malevolent way, it means they may have cognitive empathy, but they don't have emotional empathy. And if you're an empathic person, then what happens, you're literally going into a gunfight with a knife. So you have to kind of dim down your light, and you do what you need to do to take care of that, because they are ruthless and they're not thinking about you, because they don't have that emotional empathy gene to calibrate with, because it's a dead feeling. They don't have that feeling. They use cognitive empathy because they're able to observe a mirror and calculate people's empathy. You'll see a little flick in the eyes where someone's trying to be empathic, but kind of the nuts and bolts are not kind of working quite right. And there's like these micro expressions. So that kind of covers over those areas there. Enmeshment. So this goes back about the boundaries, right? So with a boundary, you stop and start, and then someone stops and starts. Now, enmeshment is an unhealthy connection with a person that ends up becoming as one. And so you lose agency and you lose your locus of control, because you're blocked in together as one single unit, and that's not healthy. So you have to kind of be aware of those kind of connections, because there's things like, let's just say you're often a fawn responder, people pleaser, doing all those kind of things, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you end up being that person's caregiver. And so you'll end up give in there. And then they just take. It's just like, but it's relentless. They just take, because it's never enough to feed them for the guys at the other end of the other end of the spectrum. So kind of mentioned earlier on. So that's kind of the enmeshment. Let's get into things like people use manipulation to shame you or do guilt tripping. Now, you've got to remember that, again, that's a boundary violation. Someone might get up one day, they're emotionally dysregulated, chronic low self-esteem. And what they do is they project that shit onto you like you're an emotional tampon, which is unfair. And so what you've got to be careful of is, with that kind of situation, you want to be empathic, you want to help, and you want to be kind and everything else. But then when you're not, in comes the shaming, and they'll guilt trip you and stuff. Now, you've got to remember, this is on them and not on you, right? So sometimes you have to use the grey rock technique, because, reduce the communication path with people. Because what can happen is you've got circular conversations. And what circular conversations is, you never get the genie back in the bottle. So you'd argue over and over and over and over and over, and it's done. And next week it comes up again, and there's an arguing over and over and over, and it's just exhausting, right? Some people call it energy vampires and stuff. But what happens is there's that level where people will project. So they'll project their shit to remove their shame, their anger, and their self-hatred in some cases, not all, or low self-esteem and stuff, and project that onto you, because that gives them the release. It's like, get this out of my body, get this out of my body. But not everyone recognizes those signs. They just feel like they're going around on a pinball machine. It's like up and down like the stock exchange. And so that can be deliberating, and obviously it takes you time off of what you're doing, and it shows that isn't necessarily going to be a healthy relationship or friendship or business. It doesn't matter what it is, but it becomes unhealthy because it never gets resolved. And then what happens, you've got the projection, the revision of history, gaslighting, which is kind of be quite damaging for people. And often this is where I think people get triggered as well. And so again, you look at your triggers. Let's just say you attract that kind of drama all the time. Now, if you're attracting that kind of drama, what happens, there are holes inside of your boundaries. And what happens is, go back again, go and look at your childhood. You need to heal any of those childhood wounds that you may have. Because what happens is, think of it as a dyad, and it's two people fit together, two ends of the spectrum. Yeah, it's normally like a slave master relationship where one is communicating up to down and the other one is trying to communicate on a vertical level. And it's getting that balance and understanding those dynamics inside of that dyad of that kind of a relationship. And what that does is that you need to obviously be self-aware. And I think this is why people deal with trauma bonding and stuff like that, because you get love bombed. Then they'll bring you down. Then you love bond. Then you bring it down. So what happens is that starts where the trauma bond thing comes into play in what can happen in abusive relationships. And that's why you need to work on your self-awareness and stuff. And again, it's the same with victimhood. That is the biggest robber of people's lives, you know. Because what happens is everyone has shit going on all the time. And that's everyone. It's not exclusive to a handful of people. Everyone goes through everything, what they're doing. They're always, you know, there's always going to be something. No matter how much money you've got. Okay, sometimes money can help relieve the problems. You can do retail therapy. You can, you know, and it puts you in a better position. But yeah, the thing what you get is you've got to be careful of as well. Is, let's say you play the victim, or give me an example. Let's just say, I want to kind of tie it back to going back earlier. Let's say you got someone that is constant arguing all the time, right? But then if you tell them the truth, they then play the victim. Or if they don't get their own way and they explode and rage, or they sulk, then what you're left with is like, that point is where they play the victim. Now, I'm not saying that victimhood can be in all different side of things, right? And I think it's very important is for you as a human being, and I say this with love and empathy, is that if your victimhood, if you feel that way, if you feel the world's against you, what happens is it's going to lead to a long, unhappy life. And what it is, no matter how you kind of put it down, no one comes to save us. I've said this to close friends of mine who've gone into therapy and stuff, and they didn't want to go. And I just said to them, look, the only person you can save is yourself. And when you can save yourself, you can help others. But what we end up doing is it's on us as human beings ourselves to work our way, find that route, that map to get out of wherever we are for a better life. A lot of people suffered through COVID, as we know, but I just want to empathize and say the point, this is not me being judgmental. I'm saying this from a place of love, is if we obtain, and me, anyone, obtain a victimhood mentality, it really robs you of having a great life. I know it's hard to pick yourself up and go again. I mean, I've said it on the show, but even like when I was 2010, business went down, my son died, my daughter died, racked up a load of debt, nearly lost the house, walked out of a job, and then got on my bed and started building websites in 2011, and here I am today. But I think I needed to hit absolute rock bottom, because then I could see where is up. Because you can't, when you're on the floor, and this is the thing, you've got to do the rounds. You've got to get in there and do the rounds. Life is hard, right? Life is hard for most people. Some of us make it harder on ourselves in an unnecessary fashion. The idea is to get to a place where, I always say this to other people as well, it's like, when you win the war in your mind, you win everything. Because ultimately, peace of mind. And a lot of people struggle to get there, maybe self-esteem, maybe imposter syndrome and everything else. And they're running through life like that. But and it normally comes as you get older. As you get older, I say, probably get more wiser, because you've made a lot of the mistakes. And as you get older, you learn more from those mistakes as well. But the ultimate goal to get to, because I think, you chase the pound note and you become rich. And, you get to that stage. I'm not talking of me. I'm just talking about generally. You get to a stage, you earn a load of good money, and it's like, is that it? And so really, it's the journey that you're on. And I won't get into it now. That could be another show. Is find out what your purpose is. Because when you've got a purpose, you've got a navigation system. When you have a purpose, you can get up every day. That's what helps you get up a day. Something that's greater than you. Think about, and I mean, keeping away from the solipsism and everything else. Think of something that's greater than you that you can charge for and have a purpose. That is one of the key things I think the great navigation is your purpose and your peace. And again, we're going to get into now is the philosophies. So this is quite long. Now, these are philosophies that I've designed. I've actually read them out on the show once, and you go through them and you update a lot what you do with this in terms of things will change and something else will come out, and you'll hear a little quote and you go, I like that, and that fits me. And so what this does is this is part of your navigational system as well. What do you stand for is what I really want to say. What is your character made of? What do you stand of, and what do you believe in? So I've got 5 here, and then they're bullets underneath, so it's quite long when I go through them. But the idea is for you to take a piece of paper and write down your philosophies, and you develop those philosophies over time, and you update them because your mindset changes. Certain things in your life change, so you will adjust yourself. But what it is a navigational system. Now, there's a lot here, but you won't necessarily, I remember all of them, and I won't always get them right. But no one's perfect, right? We just get on and get shit done. And we go through life and we just try and do the best we can. But what it does, it keeps you on that map, right? See, it puts you on that navigational system. So the first one is verify and then trust, right? And under this, trust is earned and not given. Face value is not enough. Keep your inner circle small, layer outwards. Always trust your gut. And if you don't feel right, it's not right. Words are only 7% of communication. When you have amazing friends, families, and partners, invest in them, love them, and protect them. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Help as many people as possible. Number 2, learning through pain, failure, loss, and betrayal. These will give you life's biggest learnings, but build your resilience. What doesn't break you makes you stronger. Setbacks make way for comebacks, and failure is only final if you quit. Bite down on your gum shield and finish the rounds, as everyone has a puncher's chance. Number 3, extreme ownership. Locus of control should be internal but not external. Be aware of external subconscious, unconscious rules. The world owes you nothing. Do not be entitled. You owe it to yourself to shape your own future. Agency, completion of oneself, conviction of your actions are not driven by the opinions of others, good or bad. Forgive others, forget where applicable. Master your own emotions, or others will master you. Number 4, saying no. Does it make meaning? Does it make me happy? Will it make me money? These answer every business decision, like big business decision I make. This means saying yes to a tiny amount of opportunities, though it leaves a lot of short money on the table. Always play the long game in business and don't cut corners, as those sharp edges will come back to haunt you. Take in as much advice as possible, but filter and double down on the premium wisdom. Work to your strengths in business, fix your weaknesses in life. Number 5, make love, not war. Be kind, but not over conscientious. Put yourself in other person's shoes. Resolve conflict as quickly as possible. Do this behind closed doors. Communication is key, and if you're wrong, own it. Don't let your ego get in the way of tranquility. Identify reaction-seeking behavior and sincere communications. Never communicate sincerely with the insincere. Negativity is bad for your health, physically, mentally, and on the cellular level. Never hold a grudge. Nothing ever good comes of it. Always set strong boundaries with toxic people and let them know the consequences of breaching them. Mind your own business and don't fight other people's battles for them, but always look out for people and protect them. Living your best life and ignoring the drama is often enough, but always be ready to stand your ground and go out on your shield. Never show mercy with malevolent people. It's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war. Tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, but show compassion with your words. Make the tough decisions first, no matter the consequences, and keep your karma clean. Above all, choose being kind over being right, and often it's not what you say, it's how you make them feel. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, and integrity is what you do when no one else is looking. All right, I'm going to sign off. I hope you enjoyed that show. We haven't done one for a long time. There's quite a lot of stuff to take in. Feel free to drop me an email, danny@sellersessions.com, if you have any questions or want to follow up. Other than that, take care of yourself.